Thank you, computer voice. So, as previously mentioned, this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to Hani's YouTube channel, which we already popped in the chat, and we'll pop it in there again. So, who already has subscribed to Hani's YouTube channel? Any nods? Thumbs ups? Excellent. Lowry? Anybody else? Just one more. I think Joy nodded, but I might be projecting, so that's two. I'll say it's a representative sample of 96. And we will kick off now. We are joined today by two fantastic speakers, and I'm really happy about this, Paul and Hani. So Paul brings up experience of 25 years of working in financial sector, culture, analytics, all that good stuff, applying behavioral science. He's about to launch a cheeky podcast as well, but he'll tell you more about that later. And then with Hani, in my history of presenting speakers for the last 12 years, I don't think I ever had a speaker with a more eclectic career path. So we have airline pilot, air captain, cockpit design, culture analytics, behavioral science, educated in physics. So it's very hard to present both Hani and Paul. So I'm going to take the low conscientiousness way and high agreeableness, and I'm going to pass it to Paul to kick us off. Paul, over to you.
Nikita, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. As we've started with the cheeky promotions, Nikita's mentioned that I'm going to be launching a podcast. I wanted to have something ready for you today to share, but I don't have a link yet. But if you want to connect with me through LinkedIn, I'll put my details at the end. Then it would be lovely to hear from you. It's going to be called The Worst Behavior, riffing on the idea of the worst behavior that is tolerated in an organization and helps define its culture. And we're going to have some great guests on. It's going to be really fun, quite interesting, and we're going to explore organizational culture in a lot more detail. And hopefully you'll join us on that journey as well. So please do get in touch. And if you're interested in speaking at that as well, then please also let me know, and I'd love to have you along. So this is going to be a little bit provocative in places, but I think that's important to keep this topic interesting and also to consider the practical applications of something that so many people take for granted, which is how we measure organizational culture and some of the things that we do, particularly the engagement space. So we're going to start off with a bit of a narrative. Imagine for a moment that I'm the leader of a large organization. I care how people feel. I really do. I like to think of myself as empathetic. I use phrases like, our people are our greatest asset. You've never heard that before. I want a happy workforce because everything I read tells me that happy people are productive people. And I'm not alone in thinking this. Most of my peers think likewise. And since the early 90s, many organizations around the world have developed their own approaches to this. They measure engagement both as a primary, sometimes sole metric of culture. And naturally, an entire industry has emerged that meets that need. And there are case studies out there that show strong relationships between company performance, if we take share price as a measure of success, and a measured engagement score. And reports continue to be published regularly by the great and the good, extolling the virtues of engagement tracking. And all of this seems absolutely wonderful. So I'm the leader of this organization, and I think I want to create some sort of tool to measure engagement within my business. So what do I want to measure when I set about that task? So these things boil down to around 5 core aspects and 1 opportunity. The aspects that most people tend to reach for are basic sentiment, and by that we mean happiness. How happy are people here? Engagement. Are people engaged with the work that they're doing? Alignment to purpose. Do we all move in the same direction? Overall satisfaction, both with the organization, but also with the job, with the processes that we have, things that we've rolled out, with communication, with management, and so on. And then lastly, and probably more increasingly over the last 4 or 5 years, what levels of stress do people incur in work? How are people feeling about coming to work? And what does that do to them in the round as a whole individual? So those are the aspects they look at. And there's also an opportunity that comes with this. That opportunity is, if we use them correctly, surveys are excellent platforms to demonstrate active listening and ensure people feel heard, as well as getting the opportunity to speak up and say what's on their mind. And you cannot underestimate that. Now, overall, surveys keep boards happy, they keep shareholders happy, and historically, even market regulators have been satisfied to consider engagement as a key metric in organizational health. So here's the first challenge that we need to overcome. I want to run an engagement survey, and I ask myself this question: what time of year is the best to give out that engagement survey? Now, the instant I think about the answer to that question, I'm automatically introducing bias into the system, either indirectly or unconsciously, and perhaps without any intent whatsoever. I will be changing the outcome, just looking for a time when the survey is most likely to be completed, or when it won't overburden people to do it. All of these things happen all the time. But sometimes people are a bit more overt. They might think about, actually, should we send this out just after bonus day? Or actually, just after the bank holiday weekend tends to get people quite excited. So let's go after that one, and so on. So we're automatically introducing a degree of bias, and it's not just there that we see that. All the way through engagement, bias creeps in. Remember, we're measuring sentiment. We're measuring feelings. They're ephemeral, they're fleeting, and they're subject to external influence. How I feel today can vary dramatically from how I might feel tomorrow. And these sentiments bleed into the specifics of what we want to measure, and in ways that we don't necessarily want to see. So again, I'm the CEO, I'm Nikita's boss, and we've just had a really difficult conversation. This afternoon, Nikita goes back to his desk, and he's presented with the survey which he needs to complete. And he encounters a question about what he thinks of leadership here. How's he likely to respond to that? In that instance, recency bias kicks in. He's most likely to record a very negative result to that question. And that's just based on that one interaction. Now imagine another employee, different team. This one works in a very toxic team. I've got a terrible organization. Sorry about that. Their manager is a bully, and they come to work every day absolutely terrified about speaking what's on their mind. They open up their survey and they're asked, using a standard 5-point scale, how happy are you working here? Well, what do they say? They know, or at the very least they fear, that any answer other than a favorable one is going to bring about consequences. And you know what? It's easy to kid a Likert scale. Any questionnaire where it's easy to see what the right answer is, what I'm expected to say, gives me the opportunity to say what I think you want to hear. Now, thinking back to the leadership for a moment, there's a growing risk as well, particularly as organizations get more institutionalized and institutionally bound to measurement, to experience number chasing. And we see this all the time. We call it target fixation. That term actually comes from the Second World War, when pilots would focus so hard on the target that they'd forget the more important things like the ground, stuff like that. Now, even though any statistician will tell you that once you meet statistical significance, everything else is a bonus. But leaders aren't statisticians. What they are is competitive. And they'll always want more. More responses than last month, more responses than last year. Richer data to mine. They want to brag about how many million data points they've got to work with. And that will put pressure on the people who are responding. If they receive 3 increasingly agitated chasers over the course of a week, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? When are you doing it? What frame of mind does that put them in when they come to respond? And how does that influence what they do and don't say? Equally, if nothing's demonstrably changed since the last time we did this, what incentive is there to be completely honest at all? I know that if I say anything at all, nothing's going to happen. So why say anything? And if I do say anything, if it's a Likert scale, it's going to be 3s all down the middle. Thank you very much. Now let me get on with my work. So whether it's completion rates or meeting particular scores, it's very easy to lose your way and to concentrate more on the process of listening than on the listening itself. And some places have even, this is fairly extreme, but baked achievements of engagement targets into management and leadership performance metrics. We see less of this now, but that still exists. And all the while, the expectation mounts. We achieved 90% satisfaction 2 years ago, 95% last year. Guess what we're going to do the damnedest to try and achieve this year, whether you like it or not. Just take a moment to think about what sorts of behaviors those inputs drive within the organization. And what happens in practice? So we've completed our survey, the window's closed, the analysts set about working on it. Things go quiet for a while. My leadership team all pat themselves on the back and go, well, great job, well done. And we put it to bed for another year. Now, down in the teams, they'll be raking over the coals of this. There's a risk that people are taking responses personally. I've heard senior HR leaders in large organizations call their teams together to tell them how disappointed they are with the results. Can you imagine that for a second? Having been honest in your response and then get told that what you've told them and how you feel is a disappointment to them. Say the results come out and they're either better or worse than we were last time. What do we do with it now? There's a tendency towards doing nothing if they were good before. Why would you rock the boat? And if they weren't good before, we can go one of two ways. We just excuse them. Well, they were rubbish before, but never mind, things are changing, and that was the reason why the scores were the way they were. The markets were in a certain place, they're not in the same place now. We can pin the results on all those factors that we have no control over, and so we don't have to take accountability for them. Or we can decide to do something. Who ends up getting that responsibility? Well, more often than not, it's the person who fails to take one step back quicker than everybody else. Like, we're all busy, right? So if we're lucky, we get lots of positive intent, but often very little gets prioritized, it's swiftly forgotten, and the next thing you know, we're back into the next cycle without any meaningful change happening. So the curveball's this. What if engagement is an output and not an input? Hani will talk about this in a bit. So behavioral science teaches us that the way people show up at work, the behaviors that they exhibit and which the organization exhibits, probably more importantly, will shape how people will feel about working here rather than the other way around. And in fact, happiness as a measure is an entirely independent variable as to whether an organization is going to be successful or not. I can point you to a really fascinating paper that was published last year by, I think it was Oxford University and Harvard University together, where they looked at well-being and performance. And they found strong correlation between the two. But we need to remember correlation is not causation. Happiness is independent of performance. There are countless organizations that I can name where you've had happy, satisfied, engaged workforce right up until the point where they're all made redundant and the company stops trading. So as a leader, I want to understand which lever can I pull to achieve better performance? What is it that causes that? And is it something that I can actually affect? And this is the crux of behavioral analytics. So here's a novel thought. What if we didn't look at engagement in isolation? Now, remember, I'm not here to destroy engagement as a measure. It's incredibly important. And when it's done right, has huge value, both in terms of listening and in terms of what you can do with it. But rather than focusing entirely on it, what if we brought in additional behavioral analytics to be able to support, understand what's shaping it? Because the reality of an engagement survey is that if you leave it on its own, it's just going to be a fair weather barometer that tells you what you want to hear. So there's got to be a better way of tackling these problems without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm going to pass to Hani to find out what that might look like.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. All thought-provoking. And listening to Paul, well, here is this incredible obsession, which we all have, which is measure the easiest thing that you can measure quickly, what I call in the book, the get me there rightists, right? Just get me there. I don't care how, just give it to me now. I want it. And the obsession of wanting to just, and I say only just, measure the outcome, right? These are easy. Performance doesn't need a PhD in measuring are people producing the results that we want or not. Are people leaving us or not? Are customers staying with us or not? They're not difficult metrics. I mean, are they? Come on, right? But they constantly tell us the what has happened or what is happening. The what is great. We gotta know it. It's an easy target, though, to find, while the hardest one, which is really odd in today's world, I hope you'd agree, is this lack of a want or a need to understand why. So why did this happen? Why is it happening? I'm a little bit like a kid when it comes to that, I'm afraid. I'm a bit of an annoying child in the back of your car going, are we there yet? I tend to keep saying, why? Why? Why is this happening? Oh, people aren't happy. Why? People are happy. I'll still ask why. People are leaving us. People are staying. Our results are great. Our results are rubbish. And I want to just keep asking why. And if we can't answer why, just by basic common sense, you can't ever repeat something or stop it happening or improving it. It becomes a stab in the dark. And if you don't know those why levers that Paul just talked about, it becomes incredible noise. You know why? Because the whats are so many. If you are, I'll pick on Paul because he said he's a leader of this toxic organization. We don't want that, do we? You know, I want to improve performance. I want to improve engagement. I want to improve happiness. I want to improve customer stuff. I want to improve this. I want people to go, oh, hey. You know, I go in, I walk in often to organizing. I am not one of your leaders and you already overwhelmed me. What do you think? I got a day job. You know, I'm going to get on, you know, you gave me 30 what you want to improve. I don't know how any of them happen or why they even happen. So what do you expect? What will happen is what Paul said. They'll be ignored because we don't know the why. They'll be kicked down the road. The next survey, is it roughly a year later, Paul, it will come in? Maybe 6 months, I don't know, something like that. And then we'll measure again and we're back into that vicious circle. So not knowing the why is one of the biggest issues I'm going to throw out there in analytics. Now, whether you're going to agree or disagree with me, go and do your own studies for that matter. But I found the biggest why when it comes to really understanding organizations are behaviors. I'm going to just avoid that word culture for a minute because I know culture has a big old, you know, let me define it in so many different ways. And I agree with you. I have big definitions for it right in that book. But let me just talk about the why being action-based, right? So is this a good moment to pull that great big handbrake? And not that I want to geek out with IO psychologists around this very table, but say, what are the differences between the outcome and the behaviors? Really basic, right? And it's not too difficult to pause for a minute and say, well, behaviors are the foundations of actions, of what we do. Really basic examples. From a behavior perspective, do we practice expressiveness or not? Right, I hope you would agree that that's a behavior, you know, speak out or be quiet, say nothing. Do I follow the rules or I don't? Do I follow the processes or I don't? Right, these are basic behaviors, the actions that we might take, the foundations of the actions we take. The outcomes, this what, the constant chasing of what, are the consequence of that action. So if I want to use Paul's example, because I love to just pick on things we already heard, whether I am engaged or not, or happy or not, well-being has many measures actually, so not just happiness, I'm afraid, I'm sure you'd agree. Essentially, what it really means is that the behaviors around me are causing me to feel the outcome happy. Trust, I love another one. Let's focus on trust. Let's focus on happiness. Let's focus on performance. Let's focus on risk. No. I want to focus on what drives those things, which are the behaviors. So if you behave in a certain way towards me at work, Paul, I'm going to trust you as my leader. If you behave in certain ways, I'm not defining the behaviors here for a minute, so don't jump up and down, but just a bit, bear with me, give me my Zen moment. If Paul's certain behaviors does not cause me to feel I trust him, I won't. So I trust. I mean, trust starts at somewhere, whether we like it or not, for most humans, somewhere like at the zero. And then the way you behave towards me or not will make me feel good about myself, the way, I'm happy to be here, I trust, and so on and so forth. This constant ignoring of understanding what drives those metrics, including performance. Do we have a culture? So when I avoid the word culture, do we have the behaviors at the place that actually help us drive performance or not? Because you can focus on performance. I love that word. What are you going to focus on? Performance. Okay, but shouldn't we focus on what gets us to that outcome? You can't just focus at an outcome, because if you do, what do you think will happen? I'll tell you. We do whatever we need to do to get to that outcome, which may include shortcuts, horridness, possibly criminal stuff that might happen along the way. I mean, we've seen that before with many organizations. But come what may, we'll get to that outcome. Likewise, just so that I'm being balanced, and I know I'm an advocate for the why, the why and the how, so behaviors. I don't want us just to focus on behaviors, not understanding the outcomes, because people say, well, I'm not accountable, I don't care. You're telling me I got to do this, but if I do this, what do I get for it? So that link between the why things happen and what has happened, and again, I'm not suggesting, as I hope the book, this is a quick correlation analysis. This is, if you love your maths, a lot of deep multi-regression analyses and multiple outcomes, and the whole story is there, becomes meaningful. Let me give you an example. In our journey, instead of telling them all about engagement score is high, which we constantly, follow and benchmark, or low, great happiness, bad happiness, whatever, if I simply walk into the entire organization or to the boardroom or whatever and say, you told me you want 20 outcomes or 30 outcomes, you want performance, you want good risk management, you want people are happy, you want, all rattle them out. I say, great. To get to those, we discovered you have 4 critical behaviors you need to focus on. If you do that, you are 10 times likely to get that outcome, 20 times likely to get that, 30 times likely. But forget those for a minute. Let me just tell you, 4 levers, 4 behaviors will get you all of those. Suddenly, for my brain as a manager, as a leader, or anybody in the organization, I go, okay, right, I'll get 30 for 4, simple buying mechanism, right? Give me 30 for 4. Okay, right, tell me about the 4. And it becomes then the why. So what are we going to do about those 4 behaviors? We want people to be more expressive, could be one. We want people to experiment more with the way they work, and so on and so forth, in an easy, amenable way. Now the question comes, oh, great, so we know why. So what are we going to design? I use the word design. Whoever, I think Lowry talked about the COM-B model. It's going to come in, Lowry, now. Look, the design, is it the place or the people? I'm afraid the simplicity of the sometimes pure outcome masks, is it the place or people? Because you get an outcome. And what I mean by this, does the environment allows me to behave in a certain way, drives me to behave, and do I enact that? I can get you Einstein in your organizations. Sadly, if the place has got to stop that person, you won't get the great outcomes that Einstein can deliver. Quite simply. So we do need that COM-B model of interest. I talk a lot about it as the capability, opportunity, motivation. Opportunity, motivation comes in the place. So do design an environment that really brings those in. Like if I want to be expressive, so what are we doing at the place to allow that to happen? Not just say it, by the way, really allow that to happen, opportunity. And how do we motivate more people to speak up? Even if they are expressive capability, they don't know when to speak up or how, just those in place actually start promoting it. And now you can focus your effort at how are we going to drive that personal capability. So that great triangle that drives place and people becomes critical in analytics to link to the outcomes. And that's why I love what Paul was saying, is you're chasing all of these outcomes. Engagement is one of them. I'm not against that. Happiness, trust. I think all of those things that come up in the engagement survey, wonderful. But if they're not linked to the behavior, and they on their own are not a culture measure, I'm afraid. I hope we can just agree that, right? It cannot be your culture analytics journey is people are engaged or not. I mean, I have seen it is, but it just can't be. But the whole ecosystem in bringing quantitative measure, people, how much sick leave do they have? Who talks to who? How many people leave us? Now, all of those are important measures, including that important engagement approach in that ecosystem. These are numbers. Bring them in. There are now ways of measuring behavior, obviously. Talk about it here. Place and people. Bring it into that great bucket of analytics with proper scientific approach can give simple stories. As simple as me being able to, and I remember quite recently standing in front of a board who told me, I hope you're not going to show us lots of graphs today because we just don't want lots of graphs. Hang on a minute, you're a board of a bank. Yeah, but we don't want a lot of graphs. Okay, well, here's the story. Here are three behaviors you've got to focus on that can give you those 38 outcomes you're after. I got their attention in the first 30 seconds. Wow, really? Yeah. So tell me, what do we need to do to make those three things happen around here? And now it's about culture design, organizational design. I know we already talked a little bit about environmental design in the last webinar, which I really enjoyed in Nikita's presence. So those things are not difficult to demystify, but surely our listening strategies should change, is what we're trying to say. The things that I have learned, which I want to add to this wonderful webinar today, is a lot of even the engagement surveys out there, which I have studied quite a few of them now, are themselves invalid measures. God help me, some of the questions, when we start really looking at them, correlation between them is decimal 9 and above. One particular organization, when I analyzed it, 55% were call it, you're just asking the same old stuff again and again and again. It's not even give you variability. There's no even validity in that. But we always done it that way. Oh, well, we can't change. Why can't you change? Oh, we measured it 10 years, for the last 10 years the same way. How can we give the same report again and again for the board? And that's so it's same old. They never change, never improve. We just got to keep doing the same and expect a different outcome. And that's the sign off. It's fascinating how we just get clutched to those exact same measures as if the world is not moving on. And again, never understanding that big question of why. Why does it happen? So really, I hope as I'm going to hand over back to Paul, but if I can just keep you thinking about a connected system where engagement is important, bring it together, keep asking why, and don't ever get too excited by just pure engagement numbers. As Paul just said, we've seen organizations fall to their knees. Just as they're falling, engagement is their highest. Why? I'll tell you why in the book as well. I did give an example, wonderful example, real numbers, where the place and the people are close in behavior. Sadly, the wrong sort of behaviors we want, i.e. I rogue the place and place allows me to rogue it. I'm engaged and happiness couldn't be better, but it's the wrong sort of engagement. There's the right sort of engagement, the wrong sort of engagement. Yet it's an engagement score. I have actually seen this straight in the book. Paul, back over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to riff on that a little bit because I think something that's worth describing is how, in my experience, I've actually used the behavioral science approach that Hani uses and the tool set that he's developed in anger in pretty large populations of people across different businesses, as well as some small ones as well. And some of the lessons that we learned were quite interesting. I've just been reading through the comments that have been popping up on the side, and I'm going to reference a couple of them because I think they're quite pertinent as well. But rather than drone on for the rest of the hour with this, I'm just going to pick up 3 things that I found beneficial in complementing traditional engagement surveys with behavioral science approaches as well. The first is what we're able to do is to use these to target specific parts of a business. So you might want to say, well, I've got high levels of engagement over here in this cohort, but I know that I've got really poor ones over in this cohort. What's going on? Why are they different? What are the behaviors that are shaping the outcome that I'm looking for? And how can we influence them? And if we're measuring in a business where compliance is a factor, we can use, and Annie's already mentioned this, we can use behavioral analysis to understand more about why people do or don't follow rules. So you can start to use the data in a much more experimental way to be able to understand what's happening within your business and acknowledging that an organization isn't a conglomeration of a lot of people who all do and think exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. They aren't all robots. They have different, and we could probably do a whole new call on microcultures, but there are elements of the business that operate in subtly different ways. Think of them as dialects rather than different languages, but they operate in ways that you need to understand in order to be able to take what works in this part of the business and then propagate it into this part of the business. The second thing I wanted to talk about is building on demographic modeling. We've been able to understand how different people show up at different points in their career. The case study that I was going to reference is that we were looking at a highly regulated function, and within there, we knew that there were particular challenges that they were wrestling with at the time. And what we discovered when we conducted the behavioral science research that we did through Eyesight Tech is we found, and Hani's talked about this, that it was the place that's driving the behavior of the people. People show up in one way and then they realize, oh, that's not how I function here, because if I try, I'm just going to get shouted down. I need to conform to the norm that's expected of me. And what we found was one particular behavior was absolutely incremental in this particular case. And that behavior was the ability to innovate. That's come up with completely new ways of solving problems, not twisting what we do into new shapes, but actually starting with a blank piece of paper and starting again. And what we found was even when recruiting people who have high levels of innovation, they're coming out of other industries where they've been praised for it, they've grown that capability. In fact, the company have recruited them in for that one capability, that one set of behaviors. It was very clear from the data that within a relatively short space of time, and I'm talking 12 to 18 months, that behavior is literally beaten out of them. Very quickly, they realize, oh, right, I tried doing that here and I got my wrist slapped, or nobody gave me the recognition I was looking for. Maybe that's not how things get done around here. Maybe the place is not an innovative place. Maybe we just hunker down and do what we're supposed to because, hey, we're regulated. That's what happens. So the behavior wasn't valued. It wasn't rewarded. It wasn't recognized. And in fact, it was actively suppressed. And so the people opted to suppress it themselves. And what was really interesting was not only did they do that at a certain point in time, and I say relatively quick into their tenure, but guess what? It stayed that way for the rest of their career. Once they've suppressed that behavior and fit it in, it's much harder for them to take the brakes back off it again. You can say, hey, we're an innovative organization. No, you're not. You're a place that the last time I tried to do that, I got put on a performance improvement plan, or I got told that's not how we do things around here, or I've just seen somebody doing that and then being exited rather quickly afterwards. So The words and the actions need to follow. So how do you address some of these things? Well, one of the things that we looked at was actually something quite simple: communication. If you can identify a particular cohort using the data and getting really into the weeds with this a little bit now, then you can start to target particular communications at cohorts that you know are struggling with a behavior that is proven to drive the outcomes that you're looking for. You can adapt the tone of voice to them. You can time things according to what they need. You can change the message to make it specific to the people that you're looking to address. And I've never seen that done with engagement work, but I've seen it done with behavioral science. And it really works wonders, because all of a sudden, when people read, and it's a generic communication, but it's toned in such a way that the people that you want to talk to suddenly prick their ears up and go, ooh, that's me they're talking to here. Maybe I should pay attention and see what we need to do. I said 3 things. The third thing, and I picked up on something that Alison, I think you mentioned in the chat earlier on, which is leaders often already know what the answers are. So why are we even bothering to go around this cycle again? I see a few nods around the table here. I've experienced it. What is fascinating about taking a more scientific approach to this and using behavioral analysis is that you can challenge what you expected to see. And you can do it with the data to back up why that expectation was perhaps wrongly formed. I've gone into businesses and initiatives are already underway to try and change the culture. We've got 5 pillars. Great, it's wonderful. We've got all these things. We've been hammering away at it for 18 months, 2 years. How are you getting on with that? Yeah, it's not really working. Okay, let's come in and have a look at why that is. And very quickly, when you start to analyze the data, you can see that the 5 things that they thought were really interesting, because those were the things that ticked the boxes for the leadership team, weren't actually the drivers at all. And very quickly, you get that point where you can challenge the people who already know what the answers are and say, that's interesting because your people are responding in a way, not that tells us that this is how they feel, because remember, we're not talking necessarily about feelings and sentiment here. We're talking about how they behave. How do they show up? And what we can prove is that they're showing up in a way that is not linked to the outcomes that you're looking for. If you make these subtle adjustments to it, all of a sudden you're starting to see a very different set of outcomes with that as well. And those surprises are the bits that I live for. The bit where you sit down with the leadership team, you explain to them which drivers are shaping the way that they're going. And you can see that look on their face where they go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Innovate in a high risk environment is a really great example of that. Nobody thinks to innovate in risky spaces. And yet we proved to a leadership team that that's exactly what they needed to do as well. So I'm conscious that we're going to get some questions in a second, but before we do, I just wanted to remind ourselves that why do we do all of this? Going back to Hani's question of the why. The why behind all of this for me is that where we have an opportunity is to provide actionable insights, not just interesting, oh, people are unhappy at the moment, or happiness is rising, or people are really engaged with this particular policy. Things that you can do that change the way that people perceive the organization and that then go on to adapt and change their behaviors. Those actionable insights are the critical part of what we talk about. And as a leader, putting myself back into those shoes I started the call with, I can consider not just why people are happy and cure those operational problems. I can chase those shadows all day long, but I can start to plan for the future and be more proactive, because I can understand which are the behaviors that I need to reward, to recognize, to reflect in my business. How do I promote people who show them? How do I encourage those that don't? And then I can start to target specific inputs so that I know they deliver the specific outputs that I want to shape as well. I believe in this so much. I'm going to do my Victor Kayam now, Hani. I believe in this so much that I didn't buy the company, but I launched a company. So the company that you can see, Willow Ethos. I believe in this so much that I wanted to do this for myself. So I came out of big business in order to be able to do this for other customers and other clients as well. We use Hani's behavioral science research, the technology platform, Culture Scope, Talent Scope, that enables us to work closely with our clients. We're a very intentionally small business so that they understand the people that they work with at the beginning of the project, No disrespect to the people that come from very large consultancy firms, but we're also the people that you finish the project with as well. We build relationships. Our job is to understand people. And in fact, we mentioned at the beginning of the call that I'm going to be launching a podcast soon. All of that is why we do what we do. We're trying to understand people. We want to help people understand one another. But looking at the clock very quickly, I'm also understanding that we want to take some time for questions. So, Nikita, can I pass back across to you?
Of course, Paul, how emotionally intelligent.
Oh.
Very much appreciated. So thank you so much. And Paul, I mean, just when you mentioned you want to be my manager, I was like, May I wish you all good luck in the world, as I'm sure people who manage me can tell you. And thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Hani. I can recognize that Suhair, you kept your digital head up for the last 20 minutes. So thank you for that conscientiousness and patience. So you can kick us off with the questions. If you can unmute yourself and jump in, it's great. Also, people, feel free to type in your questions into chat, so we'll engage it for the next 20 minutes. Off you go.
Yes, hi Nikita, hi everyone, and yes, sorry for raising my hand very early. I just have a very quick question about the why. So, like, what measures can we actually use to measure the why in organizations and to understand the why in relation to employee engagement?
I mean, the very obvious answer I can give you to that quickly, and I'll let Paul add, is there surely, if you are going to go en masse, have to deploy a different technique, which is where or a behavioral approach technique, which is what I articulate a lot in the book around what does a behavior diagnostic look like? How does it do it? How do you use a behavioral, psychometrically valid diagnostic that is simple, straightforward, cannot be fooled, cannot be gamed, is not going to have the moment it's done bias and transient, that if tested and retested is robust, all of those wonderful words that are critical. But it's about measuring the behaviors rather than measuring the outcome. Is quite frankly what's going to get you the immediate why of culture. It's as simple as that. Sadly, we don't deploy those, or we don't think about those, and there's very few tools around the world en masse trying to address this, which is frustrating. But it's something which I have dedicated 17 years of my life to do so. Again, probably summarized it in the book, but they are becoming now more prevalent out there. It's just about thinking different and stop doing the same and asking those important questions. So hopefully that answered your question. Not
Yes.
entirely, I'm sure.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Annie, can I build on
Thanks.
that as well?
Yeah.
And I'm going to horribly misquote, quote Simon Sinek here with the start with why. I think when we begin a piece of work, the important thing is to ask ourselves that question and ask the clients and the leadership teams, why is it that you care about this? What is it that sits at the heart of this? Because quite often they haven't even asked themselves that question. And if we want to understand, well, it's because I just want people to be happier. Great. Okay. Well, we can explore that and you delve into that in more depth. But if it's actually we want to increase shareholder value, we want to grow our business portfolio, we want to be able to deliver demonstrable improvements on what we do for our clients, you can then start to link those outcomes to the inputs. And Hani, I know you've not talked about it as much today, but there's the webinar that I think Nikita's posted links to, where you've gone into talking about path analysis, which is a fascinating aspect of the research work that goes on here. But it means that you can start to explore, I want to achieve a dozen different things. Where do I start? What's the bit that I need to do first? Which is the first domino that I knock over that will have the impact on everything else? Because I can try and boil the ocean and hit everything, but I haven't got the resource, I haven't got the budget, I haven't got the time or the patience to do all of those things. Where do I begin? And actually, that's the thing that really drives the why. Why do I want to achieve this, and how do I get it from the beginning?
Ah, okay. Okay. Thank you. Very comprehensive answer. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Anybody else wants to jump in with the questions, and then we'll go to the chat? Just unmute yourself and jump in. Joy, absolutely.
There was a question earlier in the chat that I thought was really interesting, and I've been scrolling and trying to find it and not finding it. So apologies for stealing someone's question. But I just wondered sort of where are organizations at right now in terms of like their maturity level, like looking just at engagement surveys versus ones that have started to focus more on measuring behavior? What's your sense of like the distribution, I suppose, across the maturity curve?
Hani, shall I start and then I'll hand across to you? So
Please do. Yes, you've got a lot of experience in that,
Joy,
Paul.
wonderful question. And I think it would be, I wouldn't show the full respect if I was to say that everybody is in a really poor place at the moment, because they're not. I think I need to acknowledge that there are many organizations that are doing this really well already. And there are plenty of papers out there that talk about what we've talked about today. If you want to understand where they are on that journey holistically, different industries are in different places. As I say, I came out of financial services where I think they're quite mature in some of these things. I think if you then look at manufacturing or heavy industry or retail, probably not quite as far down that journey. So I do think that we're preaching to the choir to a degree. I think there are definitely leaders out there, but just looking at some of the comments, I can see here people have had lots of interactions with leaders who still think in a way that hasn't opened itself up to this style of approach. But it's a journey that's ongoing, but it's not as far down the road as I would like it to be. Hani, would you agree? Oh,
Indeed.
sorry, Joy.
You want to say something else before I answer? Go ahead, Joy.
I was just going to say, speaking of the industries, I wonder if there's a correlation there between industries that are already harnessing behavioral science for their products and customers, and might have been the first one inward.
Yeah, if you've got a function that does that externally, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to turning it to be able to focus on yourselves as well. Although interestingly, not everybody does. There are organizations that have that and haven't yet even thought to turn that lens around. Yeah, it's a really good observation. Well done, Joy.
Yeah. In echoing what Paul said completely, I agree. It is changing. Probably when I started out of extensive 7-year research and then started commercially, actually almost 10 years to the date, I probably had far too many rocks thrown at me then, and things are getting better. I would just want to add something to you, which I hope if there is anybody in HR around here or watch this podcast afterwards, in human resource departments generally, I'm going to say we got to take some of the blame that we are not adopting this fast enough, because we're not challenging what we're doing, how we're doing it, bringing technology, bringing behavior science into it, as if we're scared to doing that, and we just do a little bit of, well, let's do the same. I want to promote the HR managers, leaders in this room and any other room. Stop thinking of yourself as a cost base, and think of yourself as an effective, make a difference, solve that riddle of culture by connecting the ecosystem that can transform an organization, and then you're not a cost center. That's how we should be thinking.
Mm-hmm. Think of the value add we bring. And Lowry, I'm sure your question will be a value add as well. Over to you.
Thank you, Nikita. Hello, Paul and Hani. Just there was a question for both of you. Paul, earlier on, you mentioned a paper by Oxford and Harvard. I just think I found it and put it in the chat. I just wanted to check if that's the correct one you mentioned about.
That is indeed the one that I mentioned. Absolutely. Matt Furness, if you follow him, fantastic speaker.
Oh, Matt Furness. Yeah, I follow some of his stuff.
Yeah, so Matt was referencing it relatively recently as well. So, and he made a really valid point that they draw great relationships between wellness and performance, but again, it's not necessarily causative, it's correlative, which is interesting in its own right, but it doesn't give you any insight into which drives which. But yes, have a read of it. It's a really good paper.
Will do, thank you. My other question was for Hani. When you were talking earlier on, Hani, about finding those core behaviors that can help get towards those outcomes, you sparked something I remembered from a workshop on behavioral systems mapping. And that's like, I think it's a more advanced technique. Do you cover that in culture analytics, or is there maybe another resource you'd recommend to go to learn how to do that?
So I have covered that a little bit, but to be honest, that needs almost another book. And I've been experimenting a lot. To say my journey is complete and I know everything would be absolute rubbish. I feel, although 17 years on, I've had the boldness to even feel that I can write a book. I'm still scared that I don't know all the answers. And systems design around culture is a huge topic that I am experimenting a lot with and getting great results from. But we are far, far, far away from doing it for organizations. What we've been good at in system design is driving consumer, it's funny that we just don't turn it on organizations and we still don't understand it well enough. Systems design is incredibly powerful. And boy, oh boy, if I can crack this, yeah, I'll be probably doing my next webinar from the Bahamas. But anyway, you know what I mean? It's that important. And I'm not sure that we all understand how important it is, but it really is. It will solve a lot of riddles. But good thinking, Larry. But cover a little bit here, not enough. But I am doing a lot more if you're interested. Maybe in future workshops, Nikita, I have to bring system design into our series, since you're saying we're doing a series. So we must bring it in, and I'll explain some of those things as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hani, because the next webinar, I just created the LinkedIn for it. It's now on the 16th of June. Hopefully it still works for you, Hani. And so same time. And so you can just register on LinkedIn already. There's more details to come. And before we close, it would be great to hear from you, good people, what you would like the next webinar to be on and what particular topics, especially from what we heard today. If you want to hear more from Paul, Hani, anyone else, any particular topics, it'd be great. Before we close, we have time for one more question. Would anybody like to go forward? Or reflections, if you will, or what stood out for you today? In no particular order. Natalie, you seem to be making some notes, and I'm just kind of thinking, what are your reflection points?
So I can reflect afterwards, but I think my reflection was, I think having been in sort of quite large organizations, there's a lot of talk about sort of engagement, a lot of talk about surveys, a lot of talk about culture, about organizational health, about performance, about dashboards and balanced scorecards. And quite often, it might have been one of your comments, Paul, about HR being seen as being very focused on the engagement and being the people that drive the engagement, whereas actually that's kind of fits throughout. But there isn't always a connection between other areas of the ecosystem and the business. And so I was wrestling in my head, that's why I was making notes, to kind of come back to go, well, what actually, if you were sat within an organization, what would you practically be doing with your whys to get to the 5 whys, the root cause analysis, to get to the behaviors that you would need to measure? So say, for example, you looked at performance. So that's kind of my jumbled whirlwind of what was going on in my head. But that's been really interesting and very thought-provoking. So thank you.
I love that question. I'm sorry I have to answer it, even if I keep it for 2 minutes, Natalie. It deserves an answer. And okay. I can see you're a fellow in the airline industry, where I was, as an airline pilot, flew for many years. The last airline I flew was BMI, who you would know probably well because you integrated BA through IAG. Perfect. Okay. So imagine this in my research, where I was doing a lot of behavior science around human limitations or human performance limitations. I hate the word limitations, but there we are. Where I could discover certain traits of behavior for certain pilots in an airline means that those pilots should not be randomly chosen to fly with each other, because it come in with certain events and situations. The result and the outcome would only be a horrible one, although there's nothing wrong with that aircraft. And fancy that, me being able to be bold enough to prove that, but also understand that a lot of airlines, and in fact Airbus Industries themselves, quickly tried to shut it down. They thought I was mad scientists who really should not be let loose on anyone. But that's what I mean. Think of the flight deck here, Natalie. All pilots have the same skill and same knowledge. They know their stick and rudder. They know what the buttons do. Why the hell don't they all perform the same? How can behavior here matter? And conduct for the flight, as you rock up for your next flight, is the only variable you do not know. They're all well trained, they all have the skill, they all have the knowledge. You don't know how they're going to actually conduct that flight, what behaviors are going to be present if a small benign event comes in. And it's quite scary where you think actually in certain situation, the two crew members right at the front shouldn't even be on that flight together because of the possible behaviors that they both possess to deal with situations that ain't going to pave the way. Just think about that from an analytics perspective. I'm not talking mad science here. This stuff is measurable. That would shock you today. I hope it shocks you enough to go and think about that. It'll be fascinating.
Well, I don't work in the airline industry at the moment, but
I
thank you for that.
know, but just because of your background, I went towards that. I just wanted to bring some example that I might reach out to see what I mean. That's the outcomes matter and how we get to there. And we ignore behaviors because we can't do. In an airline, luckily in the flight deck, we all care about the skill and the knowledge. We forget sometimes a little bit about the behavior, the conduct, which actually matters in many industries, not just the airline, but I brought that up to life.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hani. Just a correction. I previously said it was June. The next event is 16th of July. So you can register. It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Just love to hear from Hani and Paul, your closing statements, and then we'll wrap up. Who'd like to go first? Let's start with
we'll start with Paul.
Oh,
throw me under the bus. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just a great opportunity to thank you all for listening today to us talking about this. I think I'm incredibly passionate about it. I think it's such a fascinating, evolving part of science and seeing organizations, those moments of realization where they go, okay, hadn't thought about that before, is what keeps us going. And I think that is such a wonderful thing for everybody to chase, is helping people who've made preconceived ideas of how organizations show up and behave suddenly wake up to what the reality looks like when you really start to scrutinize the data. Hani.
Fantastic. Wait, before we finish, Paul. So people can come to you for consulting on culture using Culture Scope, Team Scope, and other tools that ISEC Tech provides. I also believe you're available for keynotes on culture as well.
Indeed, and coaching. So executive and leadership coaching.
Both for individuals and teams.
Correct. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. And without further ado, Hani, what are your closing thoughts?
I just want to leave you with one why. Just keep asking why. If you just do that, I'll be happy, because one day you'll find that why. Even if you think what I said today is rubbish, just discover your why things have happened or are happening. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. And Hani, what can people come to you for apart from potential discount on your book and anything else?
If you're interested about culture, measurement, design, about talent analytics even, or people analytics in general, design and products that can make a difference, that's what really I'm here for and trying to do for the rest of the world. The bit that I love is the most actually is don't forget teams. You know, how do we get teams really being effective? And I've got a very unique way which can help team effectiveness, which you'll enjoy. So look up the website. I won't say more now. And Paul and I do a lot together. You'll be glad to know. So I'm afraid even if you come to me, you may gonna get a lot of dose from Paul as well.
Can't escape us.
Teamwork. So on that cheerful note, if you want to hear more about Culture Scope or Team Scope or other solutions, you can either pop it in the comments, contact Hani or myself or Paul. Always happy to chat. But most importantly, thank you so much, each and every one of us, for joining us in. It's 1 hour and 5 minutes in. There's still over 50 of us left. If that's not a self-selecting sample, I don't know what is. So on that note, thank you everyone so much. This will be up next week on Hani's YouTube channel, and we're all gonna watch out for Paul Bennett's fantastic podcast, which was, once again, how is it called, Paul?
It's called The Worst Behavior.
Well, hey, because that's a good place to start. And thank you so much, everyone. Wishing you a wonderful afternoon, and I'm just gonna stop recording.